The piece from Genesis 2 that Seth read this morning is what biblical scholars would identify as the second creation story in the book of Genesis, in contrast to the first story, which is found in Genesis chapter 1. Somewhere along in history, they kind of got bumped right up against one another, but if you really look, you can clearly delineate that there are two different stories that are going on here, and these stories are myth. They are myth. They are actually what's called etiological myths that are not about really how the world was made, but why the world is the way that it is. Just as if you were to read a Native American creation story in which the great goddess took the corn and threw the seeds everywhere, and some landed here and created this tribe, and some landed here and created this tribe, you would know it's a way of describing why there are these different tribes. You wouldn't say they mean to take it literally. What we read in the creation stories of the Christian story is a way to understand what they thought life was about and who we are made to be and what it is that we're a part of. My journey with these stories really began in middle school. I can remember sitting at the dinner table with my father as he began to break it down, how there are two separate creation stories, because we were discussing in school about evolution and science and how the world came to be, and I was asking questions, and so he began to describe it for me. You can find the first story in Genesis 1:1 through 2:4a, and you can read the second story in 2:4b through chapter 3. But what you find is two completely different stories. The first story, everything's created in 7 days. In the second story, we don't know how many days. It happens in what's called the Garden of Eden. In the first story, if you were to read it in Hebrew, you would see that God's name is Elohim. But when you get to the second story, all of a sudden God's name is changed, and throughout that story it is Yahweh. In the first story, you get God's voice. God speaks, let there be, and things happen. But in the second story, God not only speaks, but walks around and shapes things out of the dust. In the first story, things happen. There's light, and then there's land, and then there's plants, and then there's animals, and then there's us. In the second story, there's a garden, and then there's a man, and then there's a bunch of animals, and then there's a woman. In the first story, God is very organized. God has got a plan. Things are going to happen just this way. But in the second story, God just seems to be making it up as she goes along. God makes a man, decides that the man needs a helper fit, and so instead of making a woman, begins to make animals and bringing the animals before the man, says, hey, is this a good fit? Is this a good fit? And the man names all the animals but says, no, this isn't what I had in mind. And it takes all the way through all that to get to the woman. And then, of course, we have the rest of the story, one that's very organized and one that's just kind of this flowing, very interesting kind of story. At the culmination of the first creation story, humanity is created together, male and female, equally in God's image. But in the other story, we get a man, and then we get a woman, and then they go through the birth and the arrival of Abel and Cain. And then after Abel and Cain and that whole fiasco, then we get their third child, and their third child's name was Seth. That's right. That's right. Okay, there you go. And in the first story, humanity is the crowning achievement of everything that has happened. God looks when the humanity is there, created in God's image, and says, it is very good. We are the crowning achievement of what God has done. In the other story, well, it's another thing altogether. It's the story with the trees and the fruit and the eating of the fruit, and because they do, they get kicked out of the garden. It is a totally different story, and it's really their punishment of being kicked out of the garden, and then there's going to be trouble in childbirth, there's going to be trouble in trying to till the earth and grow things, life is going to be a struggle. They're just so totally different stories when you look at them that way. Both stories seek to answer a variety of questions about why and how the universe is, including why would anyone create this at all. Scholars will tell you that the first story actually came second. The original story that was told around Hebrew campfires for a long time, that story was written and told when Israel had kings and everything was organized and the people were at war with all the countries that were around them. But they thought they were all that because they had a king, and now we've got a temple, and we've got all this wonderful stuff. We thought we were so great. And then they begin to tell a story that says, yeah, but remember, we're the ones that messed everything up. Things aren't always as good as we think they are. We're not as perfect as we think we are. We've got a long way to go. So when people were at their height and everything was great, they told this story to remind them to come down and realize that it's not all that they think it is. But the other story that didn't come for another at least 500 years later is a story during exile, when Jerusalem's been destroyed, that temple's been destroyed, and people think that their faith is no more, that their God can't cross boundaries to other countries. And they get this story that reminds them who they are, that they were created in this organized fashion, that this God is in charge. Even though there's chaos all around us, God has a plan that's marching forward bit by bit. And most importantly, you are created in the image of God. And we need to reclaim that and hold on to that. Two different stories told at two different times in the life of Israel. But why create any of this at all? Why even start all of this? There's a couple of options. One is, if you could just imagine a deep loneliness that desires relationship. Or imagine an expensive love that bursts forth into relationship. Either one gives birth to the other. Whatever sacred holiness there was before all this was, desired something else and created an other for the purpose of relationship. The one becomes many. The unity becomes diversity, all for the sake of love and relationship. In Genesis 2:18-24, in that second creation story, God decides that the man needs a partner. She comes from his rib. And I heard someone who's very much a literal Bible reader, thinker, says that's why men have one fewer rib than women do, which isn't correct, as far as I know. But we, humanity, are all part of one another. That first man and that first woman were a part of one another. No matter where you came from, you're a part of somebody else that came together to make you who you are. This leads to what I really want to talk about this morning, distinguishing the thin line between unity and sameness. Unity and sameness. Look at us. Look at us. In so many ways, we are the same here in this space, but also in so many ways, we are different. And both are beautiful. Both should be honored and celebrated. One problem today is our inability to envision the beauty of unity while still seeing and honoring the beauty in our differences. We think we have to be the same in order to belong. The adult Sunday school class this morning was watching a video with Yvette Flender. And Yvette Flender talked about being raised in a church where there was the pressure to conform. I wrote that down as we were listening this morning. Pressure to conform, that we all be alike and have the same beliefs and the same ideas and the same looks. We are so divided by all of our beliefs in church and in politics. We're also divided by culture and race and gender and sexual orientation. Our desire for sameness makes it hard to truly value the differences and the experiences and the needs and the wisdoms of others. When we get to Genesis 11, we have the story of Babel. It's another etiological myth that explains why things are the way that they are. If you know the story, the people have a desire to build a tower that will reach all the way to the heavens. And God doesn't like that idea, and so God steps in and thwarts them by introducing multiple languages where they can no longer communicate with one another. And so people with different languages go and populate the earth, finding people who speak the language that they speak, and so the world was separated out in that way in the story of Babel. But this introduces more differentiation around the world. But the great reversal to the story of Babel happens in the story of Pentecost. Exactly, Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, the Spirit descends upon the followers of Jesus and all of those who were in that space, and they began to share the gospel, share the good news, and everyone that was in town heard the good news in their own language. Not one language, but in their own language, in the way that they could hear, in a way that they could understand. Here is that oneness in the Spirit and differentiation is maintained. What seems more gospel-like? A church's long tradition of keeping the Bible and worship in one Latin language, even when the people couldn't understand Latin anymore? Or another church's tradition of translating the Bible into hundreds of languages so all people can hear and know. And not just different languages, but also different worship traditions and theological concepts. Again, that thin line, we seek unity, not sameness. This is union that maintains and honors differentiation. Paul walks the thin line of this union when he says, on the one hand, that in Christ there is no longer male or female, slave or free, Jew or Gentile, even though there were. But on the other hand, Paul recognizes that we each are essential, differentiated parts of the body of Christ, each with special gifts to be a part of the puzzle. My wedding ceremony that I've been doing for, gosh, how long has it been now? 38 years. It hasn't stayed the same. It's evolved over time. And about 25 years ago, I changed the vows. It's still, richer, poorer, in sickness and in health. But there's another line that I added, which was celebrating our unity, honoring your individuality. I always thought that was something important that young couples need to learn, that there's a part where you are like unified, but also there's a way in which you're still growing as an individual. So, celebrating our unity, honoring your individuality, it's kind of a lot of words and they stumble over it a lot of times, but it's an important concept to have, that in unity there is still this individuality that's still growing in the midst of that relationship. Here again, that thin line, diversity amidst unity. Strength of marriage comes not in sameness, but different gifts and passions, along with shared loves and hopes. This is unity that allows for individuation. The two great commandments come out of the Creator's initial ongoing impulse to create the other, designed for relationship. Those two great commandments are love God and love your neighbor. This is not myth. This is real. We are made for this, not to be the same, but piece together in our differences. It took two completely different creation stories to get across one essential truth. We are each uniquely made for relationship with God and one another. And on this World Communion Sunday, I continue to pray, come, union, come. Choir.